She was 57 years old, and she had just lost the only thing she had left to lose. Not the house. She had already lost the house, not the savings. Those had gone quietly over the 2 years her husband Raymond spent getting sick in a way that the insurance company kept finding reasons not to cover. Not her job at the school district office in Macon, Georgia, where she had worked for 19 years, filing attendance records, and printing lunch menus, and knowing the name of every child in every building, because the district had frozen her position while she took unpaid leave to care for him, and then eliminated it entirely 6 weeks after his funeral, with a letter that used the word restructuring 4 times in her name, once, spelled wrong. What Nora Holt had lost on a gray Tuesday in March, standing in the parking lot of a Food Lion with $31 in her checking account, and a cart full of groceries she was about to put back, was the last thing a person loses before they stop being able to pretend. She lost the feeling that things were going to be all right. She stood there in the cold drizzle between her cart and the open trunk of a 2009 Buick with a cracked tail light, and she counted what she had. $31, a car that needed a water pump, a storage unit in Macon holding what remained of 32 years of married life in 14 cardboard boxes, a sister in Knoxville who had said to call anytime and meant it less with each call, and somewhere in rural East Tennessee, in a county Nora had not visited in over 20 years, a piece of land that had belonged to her mother's people, to her grandmother specifically, a woman named Bess who had died the previous October at the age of 91, alone in a house she had lived in since 1958. Nora had not gone to the funeral. Raymond had been in the hospital that week, and she had called her cousin to apologize, and her cousin had said she understood, and Nora had believed her because she needed to. The estate had taken months to settle. When the letter from the attorney finally came, it was thin and polite, and told her that Bess had left the property equally to her 3 grandchildren, but that the other 2 had already signed over their shares to Nora, because they did not want it. The attorney's letter described the property as follows: a wood frame house, approximately 100 square feet, built 1941, condition unknown, on 4.2 acres in Harlan County, Tennessee, 1 outbuilding, 1 hand-dug well, unknown condition, value assessed by the county at $8,000, which the letter noted was generous, given the state of the roof as observed from the road. $8,000 and a bad roof. Nora put 12 items back in the Food Lion cart, kept the bread and the peanut butter and the coffee and the bag of rice, and drove back to the extended stay motel room that had been her home for 6 weeks. She sat on the edge of the bed and read the letter again. Then she read it a 3rd time. Her grandmother Bess had been a difficult woman. That was how the family put it. Difficult. Which meant she was sharp-tongued and proud, and did not apologize, and did not explain herself, and had a way of looking at a person that made them feel she already knew everything they were about to say, and had already decided what she thought of it. Nora had been a little afraid of her as a child. As an adult, she had found reasons not to visit. Too far, too busy. Raymond didn't like the drive. She had told herself she would go when things settled down. Things had not settled down. And now Bess was in the ground in the Harlan County Baptist Church Cemetery, and the house she had lived in for 65 years was sitting empty on 4 acres of East Tennessee ridgeland, with a bad roof and a hand-dug well of unknown condition. And it was Nora's, apparently, because nobody else wanted it. Nora lay back on the motel bed with the attorney's letter on her chest and looked at the water stain on the ceiling that had been there since before she arrived, and would be there long after she left. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about the few memories she had, mostly from childhood, mostly vague. The smell of the house, wood smoke and dried herbs hanging from the kitchen ceiling, and something underneath it all that was just the smell of old wood, old stone, old time. The way Bess moved through her own kitchen without looking, her hands knowing where everything was without having to search. A metal box she kept on the top shelf of the bedroom closet, that she never opened when anyone was watching. And something Bess had said to her once, when Nora was maybe 9 years old, and had asked her why she kept the porch light on every single night, even when she wasn't expecting anybody. Bess had looked at her for a long moment the way she looked at everything, like she was weighing it. Because somebody always might be, she said. And that was all. Nora had not thought about that porch light in 30 years. She thought about it now, lying in the motel room with the letter on her chest, and $31 in her account, and nowhere on earth that was hers to be. In the morning she called the attorney, and told him she would take the property. He sounded mildly surprised, which told her something. She packed the 2 bags that held everything she currently owned outside the storage unit, checked out of the motel, folded the last of her cash into the front pocket of her jeans, and drove east on I-40 toward the mountains. If this story is already finding you somewhere tender, we are glad you are here. This is Grand Stories, and before we go any further, take just a moment to subscribe if you haven't yet, and tell us in the comments where you are listening from today. We have listeners all over the world, and every single comment reminds us that these quiet human stories travel farther than we ever expect. Now let's get back to Nora. The drive took 4 hours. The interstate gave way to a 2-lane state route that curved up into the Cumberland Mountains, the kind of road that doesn't hurry, that requires you to slow down whether you want to or not. The trees were bare in the March cold, and through them Nora could see the long ridgelines running parallel to the road, blue-gray in the overcast sky, folded one behind another all the way to the horizon. She had grown up in the flatlands of Middle Georgia. These mountains had always felt foreign to her, belonging to her mother's side in a way she had never fully claimed. She found the house at the end of a gravel lane that turned off a county road with no name on the sign, just a number. The lane ran uphill through bare second-growth timber for about a quarter mile, and then the trees opened and there it was. It was smaller than she remembered, white paint gone gray, and peeling in long strips from the clapboard siding. A front porch that sagged on the left side, where a support post had rotted through and been replaced at some point with a cinder block that had since shifted. 2 windows on the front, both intact, filmed with the grime of a winter without anyone to wipe them. The roof. She could see from the car that the attorney had not been wrong about the roof. The back slope had a visible dip in it, the kind of dip that means the decking underneath has given way. And there were 3 courses of shingles on the front slope that had curled up at the edges and lifted away from the wood like pages of a wet book. A front porch light, still mounted beside the door, bulb burned out. Nora sat in the car for a long time before she got out. The key the attorney had mailed her was on a plain ring with a paper tag that said, "Front door" in handwriting that was not her grandmother's, some clerk's hand, efficient and impersonal. It turned in the lock with some resistance, the way a lock turns that hasn't been opened in months, and the door swung in and the smell came out. Wood smoke, dried herbs, old wood, old time. She stood in the doorway and the smell hit her somewhere below the throat, in the place where memory lives when it's too old for words. She was 9 years old for a moment, and then she wasn't. She stepped inside. The house was 4 rooms, a front room, a kitchen behind it. 2 small bedrooms off a short hall. Everything was still in it. Her grandmother had apparently not disposed of a single thing in the last decade of her life. The furniture was heavy and old and real. Solid oak and black walnut that had been in this house since before Nora's mother was born. The kitchen still had a wood stove for heat and a gas range for cooking, the propane tank outside presumably empty. The shelves still held her grandmother's canning jars, row after row of them, pint and quart, the older ones cloudy with time, some still holding preserves that had gone dark and were certainly past saving but had not yet burst. Her grandmother's coat still hung on the hook by the door. Her grandmother's coffee cup, a heavy white mug with a blue rim, still sat on the counter beside the sink, washed and turned upside down to dry, waiting for a morning that had not come. Nora picked up the mug and held it. The ceramic was cold. She set it back down carefully and went through the house room by room, the way she used to go through a house she was visiting for the first time, slowly, looking at everything. She opened drawers. She looked at photographs. She stood in the doorway of her grandmother's bedroom and looked at the narrow iron bed still made up with a quilt, and the single window that looked out on the back field, and the closet door standing slightly open. The metal box was still there, on the top shelf, exactly where it had always been. Nora's heart did something complicated. She reached up and brought it down. It was heavier than she expected, a simple gray metal strongbox, the kind hardware stores used to sell, with a hasp and a small padlock. The padlock was not locked. It hung open, the arm unlatched, the way a person leaves a lock when they want someone to be able to open it. She brought the box to the kitchen table and sat down. Inside were 2 things. A cloth-covered journal with a faded blue cover, the elastic band holding it closed gone brittle with age and broken, and a white legal envelope with Nora's full name written across the front in her grandmother's handwriting. Bess Colvin's handwriting was nothing like the clerk's. It was bold and angular, the letters leaning forward like they were in a hurry, the pen having pressed hard enough into the paper that you could feel the grooves on the other side. Nora sat for a long time with the envelope in both hands. She opened the journal first. On the inside cover in that same forward-leaning hand were 4 words, "The Book of the Porch." She turned the page. The first entry was dated September 1961. It was written in a plain declarative style, no preamble, no explanation, as if her grandmother had simply decided one day to write things down and saw no reason to explain to anyone why. September 14, 1961. A man came to the door after dark, walking the ridge road, he said, from Pineville. His boots were through. I gave him supper and the cot in the back room. He left in the morning before I was up. Left a dime on the table. I left it there. Nora turned the page. March 1962. A girl, maybe 15. Would not say where she came from or where she was going. Stayed 2 nights. I did not ask her anything. She helped me put up the last of the sweet potatoes. When she left, I gave her my husband Earl's old canvas jacket because hers was not sufficient. I have not needed it since he passed. Nora kept reading. The journal went on for 60 years. 60 years of entries, some short as a single sentence, some stretching over a page or 2 in her grandmother's compressed script. A Korean War veteran who had gotten turned around on the ridge road in a November snowstorm and knocked on the door, half frozen. Who stayed a week and fixed the sagging barn roof before he left. A young couple whose car had broken down on the county road, who had walked up the lane in the August heat with a baby on one hip and $2 between them. A woman, Bess, described only as a woman running from a man who had stayed 3 weeks and helped put in the garden and who had sent a Christmas card every year for 14 years afterward. A teenage boy heading to Cincinnati to find work at 16 years old who had stopped because he saw the porch light and wasn't sure what else to do. Entry after entry, year after year. People Bess Colvin had taken in, fed, given the cot in the back room, asked nothing of and expected nothing from. The names when she had them written down in full. The descriptions when there were no names, exact and specific and without judgment. An old man carrying everything he owned in a flour sack. A family of 5 who spoke no English and were afraid but let themselves be fed. A young woman with a bruise along her jaw, who stayed 4 nights and left while Bess was at church on Sunday, and left a note that said only thank you for not asking, and scattered through the entries, the way her grandmother scattered everything, without announcement, without sentimentality, just set down plain, were the short sentences Bess Colvin had written to herself in the margins. A woman who did not give speeches, who had apparently found the journal, was the only place she said the things she actually meant. A porch light costs almost nothing. Not having one costs a person you'll never know. The ones who are the hardest to let in are usually the ones who needed it the longest. You cannot always save a person, but you can make sure they ate and slept warm before they went back out. That's something. That's not nothing. And this one repeated in different phrasings across different years. Keep the light on. Somebody always might be coming. Nora set the journal down and pressed her hands flat on the table. She was shaking. Not from cold, though the house was cold. She was shaking the way you shake when something you thought you knew turns out to have been completely different from what you thought, and you are not sure what to do with 60 years of misunderstanding all coming clear at once. Her grandmother, the difficult woman, the one who didn't explain herself, didn't apologize, looked at a person like she'd already decided. Bess Colvin had been doing this since 1961, quietly, alone on a ridge in Harlan County, keeping a porch light on and a cot made up in the back room for 60 years, and she had never said a word about it to anyone in the family. Not to Nora's mother, not to anyone, not until now. Nora picked up the white envelope. Nora, I know we were never easy with each other. That is my fault more than yours. I am not a soft woman, and I was not a soft grandmother, and I don't suppose it was always comfortable to be around me. I know you stopped coming. I understood why, even if I didn't say so. I am leaving you this place and not the others because I watched you your whole life, trying to keep things together that kept falling apart anyway, and I recognized something in that. I did the same thing for a long time before I learned that you cannot hold a life together by gripping it tighter. You have to let some things fall and turn around and look at what's still standing. The house is not much. The land is not much. I know what the county says it's worth, and I know they're not entirely wrong. But there is something here that isn't in any assessor's report. The journal will tell you most of it, but there is something else you need to know, and I am going to tell you plainly because I was never any good at saying things the long way around. In 1987, a man named Luther Prine came to my door. He was a geologist, not much older than you are now, working a survey contract for a coal company that was trying to buy up mineral rights in this county. He stayed 2 nights because his truck had broken a tie rod on the county road, and the part had to come from Knoxville. We talked a good deal, which was unusual for me. He was a straight-talking man, and I appreciated that. When he left, he told me something his company did not want told. He said the coal seam that runs under this ridge does not go where his company thought it went. He said there is no coal of any value under this land. But he said there is a spring-fed water source at the northeast corner of the property, a deep limestone aquifer, one of the cleanest he had seen in this part of the state, and that in his opinion it was worth protecting. I had a lawyer in Harlan draw up a conservation easement that year. The language is specific. This land cannot be drilled, mined, subdivided, or commercially developed. It can only be used as a private residence. The easement is permanent and recorded with the county. Any buyer has to accept it. I have told no one because I did not want the bother of explaining it. The lawyer also helped me set aside a small amount each year in a separate account. Not much, just what I could spare from selling what the garden made and later from the timber lease on the back 20 acres. The account now holds a sum I think will surprise you. It is not a fortune, but it is not nothing. I am leaving you the house, the land, the easement, and the account. I am leaving you the journal because I want you to know who I was when nobody was watching. I was not always easy, but I tried to always keep the light on. I hope you will too. Your grandmother. Bess. Nora read the letter twice. Then she set it very carefully on the table beside the journal, and she went to the kitchen window and looked out at the bare field, and the tree line at its edge and the gray sky behind it. She did not cry yet. That would come later. Right now she stood at her grandmother's kitchen window in the cold house, on the cold March day, and she felt something she had not felt in 2 years, maybe longer. Something that was not quite hope yet, but was what lives just underneath hope, the thing that hope grows out of when it has ground to grow in. She was standing in a place that had been waiting for her. She had not known it was waiting. Her grandmother had not told her. But it had been here all along, kept and tended and legally protected by a woman who did not explain herself but had, apparently, been thinking of Nora for longer than Nora had been thinking of her. The next morning she drove into Harlan and found the attorney whose name was in the estate paperwork, a man named Roy Settles, who had an office above a pharmacy on the main street, small and orderly and smelling of old paper. He pulled the file and walked her through it methodically, the way a man walks someone through something important, who doesn't want them to misunderstand any part of it. The conservation easement was real. Filed in 1987, renewed in 2004. No commercial development, no mineral extraction, no subdivision. Any party attempting to purchase or develop the land for purposes outside the easement would be blocked by county record. The timber lease on the back 20 acres had been running since 1992 and was up for renewal. The lease income had been modest but consistent. The account Bess had built over 35 years held $41,200. Nora sat in the chair across from Roy Settles' desk for a long moment after he said the number. She never mentioned any of this, Nora said, to anyone. Roy Settles looked at her over his reading glasses. He had the patient, careful look of a man who has been the person people find out important things in front of for a long time. Your grandmother came in here every year or two, he said. Updated the account, reviewed the easement, asked if there was anything she needed to change. Last time was 2021. She was 89 years old and she drove herself here from the county road. He paused. She never talked much, but she always asked me the same thing before she left. What did she ask? She asked if the easement was still solid, if anybody had found a way around it. He shook his head. I told her the same thing every time. Nobody's getting around it, Bess. She'd nod and say good and leave. Before we go any further, if this story is reaching you the way we hoped it would, please take 1 second and hit subscribe, and leave us a comment telling us where you're watching from. Stories like this one only keep coming because of people like you who stay all the way to the end. Now let's get back to Nora, and what happened when the man in the leased truck showed up. She had been at the house 11 days when the truck came up the lane. It was a new truck, gray, with a small logo on the door she didn't recognize. The man who got out was maybe 50, in a canvas jacket that was too clean for the country, with the particular confidence of someone who has driven a long way to deliver good news he has already planned your reaction to. His name was Cliff Boone. He worked for a land acquisition firm out of Nashville. He had a business card and he offered it to her with both hands, which she had read somewhere was a sign of respect, but which struck her here as performance. He looked at the house the way people look at a building they have already decided they don't care about. And he expressed condolences about her grandmother, in a tone that moved on before the words had finished landing. He was authorized, he said, to offer her $55,000 for the property. Cash purchase, quick close. She wouldn't have to worry about the roof or the well or any of it. She could walk away clean. Nora looked at him. "What does your company plan to do with it?" she said. He explained something about mixed-use rural development, about a wellness resort concept that was doing well in other parts of Appalachia, about how these old ridge properties were really ideal for a certain type of buyer looking for an authentic experience. Nora asked him if he had looked at the county records for this parcel. He had not, he said, but his company's legal team would of course conduct due diligence during the process. She told him she needed time to think. He left a second card in case she had lost the first and drove back down the lane. And she watched the truck go and thought about her grandmother asking Roy Settles every 2 years if the easement was still solid. She drove back to Harlan the next morning. Roy Settles listened to her describe the conversation, and then he leaned back in his chair and laced his fingers together and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "What do they actually want?" she asked. He set a county map on the desk. "There is a company out of Nashville that has been acquiring parcels in this part of the county for about 3 years, he said. Wellness resort is what they say. What they're actually doing is assembling a contiguous block of land that has access to the watershed." He put his finger on the map. "Your grandmother's northeast corner is the only parcel in that block with direct limestone aquifer access. The spring is on your land. Without it, their whole assembled block doesn't have a reliable water source. The resort doesn't pencil out. They need what's under your ground, and they knew about it before they knocked on your door." Nora looked at the map. "And the easement stops them completely," Roy Settles said. "No commercial development. The spring is part of the protected land. They can offer you any number they want. The easement follows the land, not the owner. If they buy it, they still can't use it for what they want. They are either hoping you don't know that, or hoping they can find some legal argument that your grandmother's lawyer missed." He paused. "He didn't miss anything. I've been over it a dozen times. How did they know about the spring?" Roy Settles was quiet for a moment. "I believe your grandmother knew that was possible eventually. That's why she renewed the easement in 2004. Just to make sure." Nora sat with that for a moment. A woman who didn't explain herself, who kept the porch light on and said nothing to anyone, who drove herself to a lawyer's office at 89 years old in a car she probably shouldn't still have been driving, and asked the same question. Is the easement still solid? She had been protecting this for decades. Not just the land, the spring, the water. The thing underneath that had real value in a world where water was becoming the thing that mattered. She had been protecting it for Nora without ever saying Nora's name. When Cliff Boone came back 4 days later and she had known he would come back, Nora was sitting in the rocking chair on the porch that her cousin had straightened and reblocked on a visit the week before. The porch light above her had a new bulb in it. She had put it in herself on the second day, because the house needed it, and because it seemed like the right thing to do. She let him give the speech. She let him name a higher number this time, 68,000, and she watched his face while he talked, the practiced ease of it, the particular way his eyes moved to the bad roof and back to her, pricing her desperation. Then she said, calmly and without raising her voice, "Mr. Boone, I know what you want. You want the spring on the northeast corner, and you want the water rights. And you know that a permanent conservation easement recorded with the county in 1987 and renewed in 2004 prevents any commercial use of this land in perpetuity. Your company knew that before you drove up here. You were counting on me not knowing it." His ease went somewhere and didn't come back. "My grandmother spent 35 years making sure that easement held," she said. "She renewed it at 89 years old. She left me a letter explaining every piece of it, because she knew someone would show up, eventually, with a number they thought was large enough that I'd sign before I looked. You can take whatever offer you have back to Nashville. This property is not for sale." She did not say it with anger. She said it the way her grandmother might have said it, the way a woman says a thing when she has already decided, and is simply informing you of the decision." Cliff Boone opened his mouth and thought better of it. He nodded once, got in the gray truck, and went back down the lane. The sound of the engine faded into the trees, and then it was quiet. The particular mountain quiet of a ridge in March, wind in the bare treetops, and somewhere below a creek she could not see. She stayed. The decision did not arrive as one moment. It arrived the way her grandmother had apparently made most of her important decisions, through daily small choices that added up. One morning at a time, until looking back she could see she had already been going in one direction for longer than she had realized. She had a neighbor 3 ridges over named Alma Turley, who had known Bess for 50 years, and came by with a covered dish on the 3rd day, and stayed 4 hours, and taught Nora how the wood stove worked, and which draft vent to leave open overnight, and that the well had a hand pump that still drew clean water, because the limestone filter was that old and that deep. She learned the property through its seasons as they came. She learned which floorboards needed shimming. She learned how to relight the pilot on the propane line once she had the tank refilled. She learned that the back field, which she had assumed was just overgrown, had been a kitchen garden within the last decade, and that the soil under the weeds was dark and heavy with decades of composting. The best soil she had ever put her hands in. She used the account carefully. A roofer from Harlan who came with 2 sons and had the front slope done in 2 days. A plumber from the next county who replaced the water heater and told her the supply line was sound. That the old dug well had been supplemented at some point with a drilled connection to the limestone aquifer, and that the water coming out of her tap was genuinely exceptional. That he had tested it himself because he was curious, and that she should never let anyone tell her that land with water like that was only worth $8,000. And people began to find her, the way people had apparently been finding this house for 60 years. The first was a man named Prescott. He gave her only his last name, who appeared at the end of the lane on a weekday morning in April, carrying a military duffel and limping slightly on his left side. He had known Bess, he said, or rather he hadn't known her, but he had found her once, 20 years ago, walking the county road in the wrong direction in the November dark, and she had taken him in for 2 nights and fed him and not asked him a single question about where he'd been or where he was going. He had been trying to find his way back here ever since, he said to thank her. Nora showed him the journal. She found his entry. November 2004, a veteran, young, tired in a specific way I recognize. Stayed 2 nights. Mended his jacket. Sent him on with the rest of the soup and Earl's old work boots, because his were worse than Earl's ever were. And she watched his face while he read it. She brewed him coffee on the gas range, and they sat at the kitchen table. And he talked for a long time about the 20 years since. Not all of it good, some of it very hard, but he was standing here now, and that was something. He had a daughter in Lexington and a job driving parts for an auto supply, and when he left he spent an hour in the back field, pulling winter dead brush and stacking it for her without being asked. Then came a woman from Middlesboro, who had been the teenager heading to Cincinnati, who was now 54 and had made it, and come back and driven 2 hours, to find a house she had walked to in the dark, when she was 16 years old, and hadn't been sure the light was real. She sat on the porch and wept for a while and did not apologize for it, and Nora did not ask her to. Then a family, a man, a woman, 3 children, who had been the family who spoke no English, who had children of their own now and grandchildren, who had driven from Louisville because the grandmother had talked about this ridge her whole life. And finally, one of the adult children had tracked it down, and they had all driven to see it. They walked the field and the yard and the edge of the timber, and they took photographs, and the grandmother stood in the kitchen and put her hand flat on the wood stove. Cold now, it was May, and said something in a language Nora didn't know, and her daughter translated it as, "She says this kitchen smells the same." Nora opened the journal at the kitchen table with each of them. She found their entries. She watched each one put a finger on a line her grandmother had written and go still. She learned her grandmother through their mouths, through the pieces of her that 60 years of strangers had carried away, and were now, one by one, bringing back. She learned that Bess had laughed rarely, but that it was worth waiting for. That she made a bean soup that people remembered for decades. That she was the kind of woman who would not tell you she was worried about you, but who would check your boots before you left, and hand you a better pair if yours weren't sufficient. That she had sat up through the night more than once just to be a second person, in a room where someone could not be alone. This was who her grandmother was when nobody was watching. Nora sat with that knowledge the way she sat with the journal. Slowly over time, reading and rereading, finding new things each time. She understood something she had not understood before. She had spent most of her adult life being the kind of person who held on, who gripped, who white-knuckled through one thing. And then the next, the marriage and the illness, and the money, and the job, all of it held together by force of will, and the belief that if she let go for one moment, everything would fall. And she had gripped so hard and for so long that when Raymond died, when the job went, when the house went, she had nothing left in her hands and nowhere to put them. Her grandmother had known something different. You cannot hold a life together by gripping it. You have to let some things fall and turn around and look at what's still standing. What was standing on this ridge in Harlan County, Tennessee, was a house with a new roof and a deep limestone spring and 60 years of names in a blue journal, and a porch light that had not been dark since the day Nora arrived. She wrote the first entry in the journal in her own hand, on a Tuesday evening in June, sitting at the kitchen table with the window open, and the sound of the ridge coming in on the warm air, birds and creek and wind in the treetops, and somewhere below a truck downshifting on the county road. June 7. A young woman, maybe 20, knocked at 10 in the evening. Car trouble on the county road. She had a child asleep in the back seat. I made up the back bedroom and carried the child in without waking her. The mother sat at the kitchen table and ate soup and did not say much and didn't have to. In the morning I called Alma Turley's son, who does mechanic work, and he came out and got the car running inside an hour. The young woman cried when he handed her the keys and said she didn't have any money, and he said to pay it forward when she could. She left before noon. She did not leave her name. I left the light on. Nora closed the journal and held it the way she had learned to hold it. Both hands, the cloth cover soft from decades of her grandmother's hands, the weight of it heavier than it had any right to be for a book that size. She put it back in the metal box on the top shelf of the bedroom closet, where it had always been, the hasp hanging open, available to whoever needed to find it. She went to the front door and looked out at the porch. The light was on, throwing its yellow pool out over the boards and down the steps, and a little way into the dark of the lane beyond. Not far, you couldn't see it from the county road. But if you had turned up the lane and were coming toward the house, you could see it from a good way off. A warm yellow point in the dark, telling you that someone was home, that someone was awake, that there was a door at the end of the lane that would open if you knocked. It did not cost much to leave it on. Her grandmother had told her that when she was 9 years old, and she had not understood it then. She understood it now. She was 57 years old, and she had come to this place with $31 in her pocket and nowhere left to be. She had inherited a house worth $8,000 on a good day, with a bad roof and a well of unknown condition, from a woman she had spent most of her adult life believing she didn't have the time to visit. She had arrived at the very bottom of what she thought was her life, and found that it was not the bottom at all. It was a floor, and underneath it was clean cold water that had been running through limestone for longer than anyone could say. And above it was a roof that was sound now, and in the closet was a blue journal full of 60 years of names of people her grandmother had kept. From being alone in the dark, she had misunderstood Bess Colvin for an entire lifetime. She was sorry for it. She was also, standing here in this house on this ridge in the quiet of a June evening with the window open and the porch light burning, something else. She was grateful. Not for the property, not for the easement or the account, though those had saved her in the practical sense. Grateful for the letter, for the journal, for the knowledge that her grandmother had been watching her all along, the whole time she was gripping and white-knuckling and failing to visit, that Bess had been making decisions about her and for her from this ridge without ever saying Nora's name out loud. She had been in the count the whole time. She had simply not known she was being kept. Nora Holt stood in her grandmother's doorway, with the June night coming in around her, and she kept the light on. That is what a legacy is, in the end. Not the land or the money, or the things that can be assessed and numbered and argued over in an attorney's office. A legacy is a porch light left burning through 60 years of nights. A legacy is a blue journal full of names, a back bedroom cot always made up, a pair of boots good enough to walk on when yours have gone through. A legacy is the choice a woman made in the dark of a Tennessee ridge, alone with no one watching, every single night for 6 decades, not because someone would thank her, not because anyone would know, but because the light costs almost nothing, And the dark costs a person, you will never meet the one thing that cannot be replaced. Keep the light on. If this story moved something in you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you'd like to help Grand Stories keep telling quiet stories like this one, there is a small link in the description below. It is never required and never expected. It is simply there, the way a porch light is simply there, for anyone who happens to need it. Thank you for listening all the way to the end.